Conversation?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Throughout this workshop, we will concentrate on two things in each instructional topic. First, we will help you understand the basic instructional principles that apply to that topic so that you and your students can better define what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And second, we will identify and practice specific teaching strategies for you to use with any level of student. We begin with conversation. But before we begin to talk about conversation, let's return to a slide that you've seen before, showing the four components of language: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Languages are generally taught and assessed in terms of these four skill sets. These skills are what allow an individual to understand and produce language for proper and effective communication. When we acquire our own native language, the skills are most often learned in the order of listening first, speaking second, then reading, then writing. So this is the sequence that we follow with a non-English speaker. These four language components have characteristics in common. For instance, listening and speaking are oral language skills. We are using our mouths and our ears and the spoken word to communicate. Reading and writing are print or text-based language skills. Reading is a system of deriving meaning from text. Writing is the creation of that text. When we read and write, we are using our eyes and our hands and the written word to communicate. These components also have characteristics in common with regard to the direction that information flows. Information flows into our brains when we are listening or reading. Listening using oral language and reading using printed language are two different ways that people receive information. So listening and reading are known as receptive language skills. Information flows out of our brains when we speak or when we write. Speaking and writing are ways that people produce information. Speaking and writing are known as expressive language skills. So when we start by teaching conversation, an oral language activity, the student learns strategies and skills to help them understand what someone is saying. These strategies and skills can also be used to help them understand text when they're learning to read. For example, the strategy of asking someone to slow down when they're speaking or to say something again can be adapted to the strategy of reading text more slowly or to reread something that you don't understand. Before you teach reading, writing, or any of the other basic literacy skills to students who have limited English language skills, you must be able to talk with them. For beginning ESL students, conversation might take up most of your lesson time. Other language skills such as grammar and vocabulary will eventually be taught as needed in support of the conversation lesson. So we will present to you the steps to follow for teaching structured dialogues, which can be useful to your student for meeting specific needs. And we'll also show you what you need to think about if you're preparing a new dialogue. We will also share with you a useful tool for creating a new dialogue, and we'll share some activities that you can use to help your student move on to engaging in unstructured or free conversation, the kind of spontaneous conversation we have most of the time. Catherine, are you muted?
Thank you.
There you are.
That would have been a tedious few minutes. I remember that the Literacy Council will provide you and your student with material to use, and you can use the Literacy Council library that has a lot of different kinds of resources. The book that you and your student are working from will also have a lot of exercises, including dialogues. If you like, you can write your own short dialogue for your student to learn, and this can be a lot of fun for both of you. Let's talk about that for a minute. There are a few things to remember when you are writing your own dialogue. First, students need practice in both listening and speaking. You will spend a lot of time in the first steps with students just listening to the dialogue. Second, we usually introduce dialogues orally, then provide them in writing second. We'll talk about why in a minute. Next, the best topics for dialogues are based on situations familiar to your student. Provide context while students are learning the dialogue. Use props, pictures, gestures, whatever else you can think of to help them. Fourth, while it may be necessary to speak slowly and distinctly when you're introducing a dialogue, students will eventually need to be able to understand conversation at a normal pace. Students who become used to only really slow and distinct speech will find it hard to understand normal speech outside of class. Work towards speaking at a more natural pace when you're speaking with your student. Last, repetition, repetition, repetition. Students need to hear, say, and practice the dialogue lots of times to gain the confidence they need to say it outside of class. I said last, now I'm saying finally, follow dialogues with role playing. Moving from dialogues to role playing helps students move from a structured conversation to a more spontaneous one, preparing them to use their new conversation skills outside of the classroom. As I said, we typically introduce conversations orally because this supports the development of listening skills. It also avoids the language interference that reading can produce. This is where students unconsciously apply their first language sounds and letters to English words. Oral conversations help students focus on listening and on the meaning of the dialogue, and also helps them gain confidence in speaking. However, you could have a student who's a highly visual learner or who's highly educated in their native language. And in this case, it might be helpful to introduce the dialogue in writing first, or at least very quickly after introducing it orally. You just need to follow your instincts about what works best for this particular student. There's a handout that goes into more detail in your handout packet of information.
Hand gestures can be useful when teaching dialogues to an ESL student who doesn't understand English command words such as listen, say, or repeat. The signals must be definite and clear, but subtle. Some hand gestures carry unsuspected meanings because of different cultural interpretations. So we're going to show you some that have been selected because they are neutral and inoffensive. Then again, there is a handout in your package which contains these instructions. Try this with me. Watch me in the screen. To indicate that the student is to listen, put one finger to your lips and the other one behind your ear. You can also say the word listen. If you want the student to stop, hold your hand with the palm facing the student off to the side of your face so you don't block your mouth while you're talking. The student should not repeat anything that you say with your hand in the stop position. Notice that your thumb is held against the index finger. To make the gesture for beckon, turn your palm toward you from the stop position. And as you model what the student is supposed to say, slowly move your hand and your arm downward toward the student. At the end of the spoken pattern, pull your hand up by bending at the elbow to indicate it's time for your student to speak. Don't move your fingers separately, like waving backwards, as this is considered offensive in some cultures. You might also say repeat or say or your turn. These hand gestures work well with a very beginning student. After some practice, the student will understand what to do. You can then use these gestures when introducing a new drill or exercise as needed. Catherine, you're muted again.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Can't keep it straight. Okay, let's go over each of the bullet points in the steps for teaching dialogue. First, say the whole dialogue at least 2 times yourself so the student can hear how the complete dialogue sounds. Next, say each line, and after each line, beckon. Have your student repeat each line and do this twice. Do not switch roles yet. Third, the tutor and student each take their own role. The slide lists some helpful hints for what you can do if the student has trouble understanding. You could, for example, sit across from your student for this exercise and then literally move over to sit beside them to show them that this is their part. Or you could use pictures or puppets or talking fingers to represent the 2 speakers. Sometimes you may need to role play or model. You might get up, walk out the door, walk back in, and say hello as you enter the room, whatever it takes. If the student has difficulty repeating a sentence, try this. And this is counterintuitive. Starting from the last word in the sentence, have the student repeat 1 word at a time, then 2, then 3, and so on. This would sound like you, are you, how are you, hello, how are you. Remember, we're talking about a short dialogue with short sentences.
So here is a short dialogue with short sentences. We're going to use this to demonstrate this technique. Catherine is going to be my student and I will be the teacher. Watch me in the Zoom video to see how I incorporate the hand gestures. Hello, how are you? Fine, thank you. How are you? Fine, thanks. My name's Beth. What's your name? My name's Catherine. Hello, how are you? Fine, thank you. How are you? Fine, thanks. My name's Beth. What's your name? My name's Catherine. Hello, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
Fine, thanks. My name's Beth. What's your name?
Fine, thanks. My name's Beth. What's your name?
My name's Catherine.
My name's Catherine.
I would repeat that and do that again, and then move on to the third step. Hello, how are you? Fine, thank you. How are you?
Oh, fine, thank you. How are you?
Fine, thanks. My name's Beth. What's your name?
My name's Catherine.
Good. So you work into playing the different roles line by line. You can use the previous slide had a puppet with a man and a woman on it. You could show 2 people having a conversation, or you could do it with your hands like this, or you could switch positions. And Zoom is a little more challenging because you can't get up and move and sit next to them, but you can certainly turn your face like this. This is a very simple dialogue, and it is a common conversation, common to almost any language. So I think most students will get very quickly what you're trying to get them to do. Say, hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you, how are you? But what you are doing with a student by practicing this simple dialogue is showing them the pattern that they will be using to learn new dialogues. So again, like we mentioned earlier, you will most likely be having working with books that have dialogues in them. But if you wanted to prepare a new dialogue, something different that met a particular need with your student, you can prepare a new dialogue really easily. Here's some simple steps. You begin by identifying the situation. where the student might need to use English. In our example, the post office. Next, you identify one activity within that setting. In our example, buying stamps. Then you decide who is going to be speaking. In our example, the postal clerk and a customer. Then you write the dialogue. With a beginning student, it's best to try to keep your exchanges to about 3, keep it simple. If your student, depending on your student's level, they might help you create the dialogue. And then when you're done creating the dialogue, you can decide on what props you need. And for our example of the post office, you might consider pictures of the post office, some actual stamps, some money, some coins. Catherine and I will demonstrate a very simple dialogue using these steps. I will be the clerk and Catherine will be the customer. Next.
I would like 10 stamps, please.
What kind?
Forever stamps.
That'll be $5. Here are your stamps and your change.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, once you've written the dialogue, it's time to teach it. Look at the steps to teaching a dialogue. First, pre-teach any new vocabulary and grammar and use your props, the stamps or whatever, and then practice some of the phrases in the dialogue. Then you say each line and the student repeats each line. This is like we showed you before. Next, you take one role and the student takes the other role. And after you've done that, you can switch. If you have more than one student, if you're teaching, say a couple of sisters, or if you're actually teaching a class, you can switch the roles around among them. The more times you practice this, the better, so that they feel completely confident. Now I'm going to show you how an information grid can help us expand our post office dialogue. And we should have this grid up in just a minute.
Sorry.
Okay. So an information grid is what it looks like. It's a table that can be used to collect information around a particular topic. Notice the categories on this slide. I would like to in the post office, and then what's needed. Now, brainstorm with your student about what else you might do at a post office and what you'd need to do each thing. They might suggest mail a package, and you could talk about what you need to mail a package, or they might say, get a passport. And they might say, get a post office box, pick up the mail. And these would be all the things that would be needed for your role play. Of course, in a real lesson, you'd write these ideas down on the grid as your student talked, if you and your student could be together. If not, you can perhaps figure out a way to do it electronically.
Here are examples of 2 more dialogues using the post office setting, created using an information grid. These are conversations based on ideas from a discussion with an ESL student. You can see that these are a little more complex than the first one.
So once a student becomes comfortable with the structured conversation you taught them in the first dialogue, you can start to change your responses slightly to see how they reply. This moves the dialogue into a complete role play. It's an important step in moving students from just memorizing specific lines to actually feeling comfortable conversing with others. This is what we call free conversation. In this video, the students in a small class are practicing the post office dialogue as a role play. Are we ready for the video?
Maria, can you come back up here? Okay. Let's do the dialogue again. I may say things differently, so you will need to listen. Respond to me the way you think you should, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Next.
I'd like 10 stamps, please.
Forever stamps?
Yes.
Did you say 10?
Yes.
That's $4.90. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very good, Maria. Okay, Bogdan, could you come up here? Okay. Thank you. Okay, same thing. Next.
I would like 10 stamps, please. Next,
I would like to get 10 stamps, please.
what kind do you like?
What kind do you have?
Here are the kinds of stamps.
I would like this.
That'll be $4.90.
Okay.
Here are stamps, and here is change.
Thank you.
One of the great things about this video is that the teacher, I don't know who she was, she seems very sweet, but she also looks like a newbie, you know, consulting your notes and so forth. So it's not intimidating. You can do it. Okay, now that we've seen the video, let's review a few key points. Note that the tutor told the students that the responses might be different, but she didn't tell them what the responses would be. And note also that she didn't correct their grammar. Think for a moment about why she didn't. The emphasis in this activity is being on understood, not on using perfect grammar. The tutor's trying to build the students' confidence in an unscripted situation. This means giving the students practice in listening and thinking about their response without the tutor having to jump in and correct them. If the student had gotten stuck, the tutor would have provided a response for the student. Let's look at another information grid. Here's an example of another kind. You could use this kind as a template to create dialogue. There's so many questions you could ask.
It has been suggested, there are many other activities you can do with students to give them practice with unscripted or free conversations. Directions for each of these is in your Teaching Conversations handout. We've already given you an example of creating a dialogue using an information grid, but creating a dialogue can also be a spontaneous activity done at any time. It can be very effective if you follow a few simple guidelines.
Okay, here's some more ideas about creating and using dialogue. So I'll give you a minute to look them over. Here's a real example. There is an elevator in the Literacy Council office, and one day something happened regarding the elevator when a student was on her way to meet with the tutor there. And the student wanted to tell her tutor about it, but she struggled to explain because she didn't know phrases like get on the elevator, push the button, and so on. So the tutor took advantage of this opportunity, and the two of them actually went to the elevator. Standing there together, they created an exchange, which they found was a really great way to teach language that was relevant and useful for the student. First, they did it orally, and then the teacher and student wrote it down. It's not exactly a dialogue, but it's similar. And here's what they came up with. We will give you their actual dialogue. Beth will be the student, and I will be the tutor. So the tutor starts. This is an elevator.
This is an elevator.
Push the button.
I push the button.
Good. The doors open.
The doors open.
Get on the elevator.
I get on the elevator.
The doors close.
The doors close.
Push the button.
I push the button.
The elevator goes up.
The elevator goes up.
The doors open.
The doors open.
Get off the elevator.
I get off the elevator.
Okay, that was the first version. Then they combined some sentences, such as I push the button and it goes up. And they experimented with different pronouns. You get on, we get on, and so forth. After they had enlarged the vocabulary and added some more complex constructions, this was the final version. We'll go through it once more. Here is a great elevator on the first floor.
I push the round black button.
The doors open slowly.
We get on the elevator.
The doors close slowly.
You push the button for the second floor.
The elevator goes up to the second floor.
The elevator goes up to the second floor.
The doors open again.
We get off the elevator.
Notice that they have included more descriptive language, and you can do the same thing. Be creative. This can be really fun to do with your student. And when you incorporate movement into the exercise, it also helps to reinforce the learning. So use your hands, use lots of facial expressions, exaggerated, act things out, use props and pictures, be a real ham. Use your environment, the place where you meet or the place where you're sitting to Zoom. Take a walk outside. Use things relevant to both your lives. Don't forget to encourage your student to speak English during the rest of the week, not just with you.
Catherine, can I add something? It's Sarah Matthews.
Hey,
One of the things that with all of my ESL students that they have been most apprehensive about is medical visits and visits to the pharmacy. And that to be able to act those out, to do the role plays with those in as simple as a form as is possible has really comforted isn't perhaps the best word, but put them more at ease with a situation that's anxiety provoking to begin with, and then having a language barrier makes it even worse.
that's right. Thank you for that, Sarah. You and your student will be able to think of a lot of different kinds of dialogues that you'd like to create to help your student feel more comfortable having those kinds of conversations.
That's a great example of creating a dialogue with your student in context of meeting a need, a specific need that they have. Great example.
Okay, so Beth and I are going to go really quickly through these, and then we're going to ask you whether you have questions or comments or observations, and as soon as we're finished, we'll ask you to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question or to say something, and we will call on you, and then you can unmute yourself. So what are the steps for preparing dialogues? I'm sorry, for teaching dialogues?
The steps include read the whole dialogue at least 2 times, have the student repeat each line, and then you each take the proper role. And you repeat this as many times as necessary until the student is comfortable.
Right. And what are the steps for preparing dialogues?
First, identify the situation. Second, identify one activity. Third, identify the people. Fourth, write the dialogue. And 5, decide on what props you might need.
Okay, well, we're not going to insult anybody's intelligence by asking what is an information grid, but why is it important to incorporate activities that promote free conversations? Sarah gave a really good answer to that already.
Yeah, free conversation activities that reproduce experiences that the student comes across in real life. Practicing them in a structured way gives them the confidence that they need to go out and do it in the real world.